Welcome back to Vensim. This is Stephen, and we're looking at the 6.1 version for Mac. This is the interface. I have opened one of the models that comes along with the tool. The money model shows the effective interest rate snowballing on the size of the global economy is how I interpret that. So there's a lot of tools here on the I think they call it the bench, the workbench, and there's a lot here that we're not going to use. So I'm just going to X those off right now. So on the lower left-hand side here, these are analysis tools that we'll probably not use. We're not going to get too much into the documentation. These causes and uses, loops, and analyses tools are also something we'll hold off on. Over here in the top right, we're not messing around too much with those. Really, the primary ones we'll be using are the ones that are just above the whiteboard space, and then of course these in the top left-hand corner, which are all pretty familiar looking. So what we're going to do now is just open a new model. So I'm going to click here, and it's giving me a dialog box, and you can't quite see it in my screen, but I'm just going to say OK to it. And there's a lot of, again, data analysis and equations that you can put behind this tool. So I recommend just accepting defaults until you get used to them. And so now we're back. We have a Vensim unnamed variable final time. This is the default setting. We'll save this in a minute as soon as we build some kind of a model. And you'll notice it starts out in locked mode. There's the handle for moving things around. We have the variable and the arrow, and we're going to work mostly with those right now. So let's just start by dropping a variable somewhere near the center. You can see the little icon to the right of the arrow. Looks like an iBar. So I'm going to drop something in there, hit enter. I'm going to do this a couple more times. And begin to create something of a system. So there we have three variables. I'm going to click on the arrow, and now you see below the arrow cursor, you see the curve to the right arrow tool. And what this wants to do is to identify the direction of the action. So in this case, the growing action is going to impact the condition. So there's the direction of influence, and you can do this two ways. So one way that I just did by clicking halfway through. You can also go directly from one to the other. The circle here is a handle, and you can see the icon change. So we can pull the arrow out and make a nice, easy to understand flow. And it's good to shape these in a way that makes them more coherent and easier for people to understand. So now we're going to go from slowing action to condition, and then from condition back to slowing action. And that right there is the basis for how you can create causal loop diagrams with Vensim. I'm going to move growing action over just a little bit, and I'm going to make my circles just a little bit bigger to try and make these look as though they have even impact, so that looks a little bit better. It's still somewhat off, but I'm doing this just to also emphasize the importance of having a diagram be balanced. And as I've said in the past, the system should be easy to see through the shape and colors that you use in the diagram. A person should view the diagram and still get the gist of the story without anyone explaining it or without any words being posted nearby. So that's the basics really right there, and there's a few things you can do here to help make this a little bit more interesting, so I'm going to show you a couple of those right now. And one of them is the right click, or on a Mac it is the control click, and this throws up a dialog box which is going to allow me to do a couple of things. And what I want to do here is just change the color. So I guess we'll use this color. And I'm going to add to it the S, which means same. So you see what happened right there. And I'm going to come back here again, and I'm going to click the arrowhead with a right click or a control click, and it allows me to make a different set of choices. And so there's lots of ways that you can fool around and find emphases here that are useful. So far we've looked at the move size, the variable, and the arrow. There's also a boxed variable and a rate flow, which really apply more to making stock and flow diagrams. The shadow variable I haven't worked with. We're going to look at the comment right now, and then we'll look at the delete. So if you highlight comment, and you can see in the middle of the circle on the left, my cursor has a little COM next to it, so you know what tool you're using. And we're going to click in that space, and it's going to give us another pop-up box. And admittedly, the user interface is not the most stimulating, but I think you get a ton for your money. So I'd like to draw your attention to this idea right here, which is the image. And it gives me a bunch of images to select. They're actually kind of funny if you scroll down and look at them all. And I'm going to choose this one here, which is the increasing snowball moving down. And I'm going to do it again over here and pick image. In this case, I'm going to take the balancing, and you could also be using the plus or minus. And I'm going to try a color on that and see how that works. Well, color didn't do much for me, but there's the image. And just to draw out what this is that I'm modeling, I'm going to drop one more variable over here, call this limiting condition. And if you've been reading your Senge yet, you should recognize this from page 96, which is one iteration of the tragedy of the commons model. And so certainly this looks different from what we talked in class, the picture that we used a few weeks ago, but nonetheless this is the same basic archetype of a growing and increasing action over here, a slowing action over here, the condition itself, and then a limiting condition. So that is an archetype called tragedy of the commons. And let's take a look over here at this other idea about making stock and flows. So I'm going to call this something because that's about how much imagination I have in the moment. And so I hit something, I hit enter, and I accidentally tapped my trackpad. So it gave me another box there, and I can just hit escape and get out of that. So now we're going to have a rate flow into something. So I'm going to go from here, and we get the cloud, which is outside of our boundary. And I'm going to, this is not quite working. There we go. Draw the arrow as it's influencing something. I'm going to call this more. And so more is a rate of increase into something. And I might add an exogenous variable here, which is called accelerate. And now we'll connect these with an arrow. And so there's sort of a mini stock and flow where the more and the two triangles touching tips is sort of like a faucet valve, which talks about the flow, and accelerate is this exogenous variable that's influencing more of the flow, increasing into something. And so to some degree that sort of models what's happening above, but let's just say that you didn't like this, that the stock and flow model was not the best use of the modeling, so you want to go ahead and erase it. If you can see next to my cursor, there's a little Pac-Man. So little Pac-Man wants to eat stuff. So that's how you erase. And it can be a good practice to just go right back into the move and size, the hand, because if you have the Pac-Man going and you accidentally hit a few items, you'll delete a bunch of your model all at once without realizing it. So it is a little bit of a double-edged sword. You'll also notice down the bottom that you can highlight something and you can right click or control click, or you can just go directly down to this. So we've got font, bold, italicize, underline, and strike through. So I'm going to choose a bigger font size for growing action. I'm going to pick with the move size tool, and I'm going to change the color, and I'm going to bold it. And so there is just a little more on how you can ultimately customize the causal loop diagram, but I would encourage you not to go too crazy with it first. I think you're fine just to leave the arrows blue and leave the variables in the default font and work with the model for a while. And once you start to get it to a perfected place, then you might want to start tweaking some of the different aspects of it, like adding some of the S's, adding the pictures in the middle, or making some things bolder, or groups of actions in a different direction, a different color. So now we're going to save, and all this looks pretty simple. I'm going to give myself a version number, see if that takes okay. And I like to have these things go on my desktop, so there we go, hit save. So it didn't like my version 1, so let's try it another way. Maybe without the dot. And save. And it worked. So now you can see I have version1.mdl, and as a variable of limiting condition. I think that is just the last variable that was highlighted, is why it selected that. So that is your brief overview into Vensim. It's a pretty simple tool to use. It will do a lot for you the more you dig into it, and I hope that this has proved useful. Thank you.